Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, welcome. My name is Yasmin Kurzi. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a Brazilian and Latino woman with light skin and brown hair, wearing a burgundy dress and a beige sports coat. Together with my colleague, Jazz Rea, an assistant professor of data science and public policy, and also a 2025 recipient of the under Carnegie Fellowship, who is the one of the faculty co-leads of the Digital Technology for Democracy Lab at the University of Virginia. We are organizing this Gender and Tech online talk series to explore more about how gender shapes and is shaped by technologies with perspectives from the global majority. So we host today our eighth session titled Digital Transformation, exploring its meanings, purposes, promises, and failures. Unfortunately, the other speaker, Madeleine Hedford, was not able to join us today, but we are thrilled and very happy, very honored to welcome Jamila Venturini, who is the executive director of Derechos Digitales, where she coordinates the organization's efforts on artificial intelligence and inclusion in Latin America. She's one of the authors of Automated Decisions in Public Functions in Latin America from 2021, analyzing implementation cases in Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Uruguay, and has contributed to formulating recommendations for the United Nations on the use of artificial intelligence in the public sector, which are widely incorporated in the report of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights on aspects of AI and privacy in the digital age. Jamila is a journalist from the University of São Paulo and a master in social science from the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, Flaxo from Argentina. Jamila is also a member of the Latin American Network of Studies on Surveillance Technology and Society, LAVITS. Before we begin, just a few reminders for everyone here. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen for posing questions. You're welcome to write in English, Portuguese, Spanish, or French. We'll do our best to translate the questions, and automatic closed captions are turned on. The recording will also be available in the next few days. We have a YouTube channel dedicated for that. It's just Google DTD Lab, or Amy's also adding it here in the chat, on the chat. So we'll be posting the conversation there in a few days. Thanks again for joining us. Now I'll turn to Jamila to introduce herself and her amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Jamila.
Thank you, Yasmin. It's a great pleasure and honor to join you in this amazing series of conversations. Thank you also, Jess, Emmy, for the kind invitation and all the support for me to be able to join you today. I'm Jamila Venturini. I'm light-skinned Brazilian woman. I have light eyes and I'm wearing glasses today. My hair is brown and curly and I'm wearing a pink or old pink type of shirt. Today, let me share my presentation so I don't forget. Sorry about it. I hope you can already see it. You let me know if not. Today, my presentation will focus on the digital transformation of states, not private actors, which has been a key area of my attention as a researcher and as an activist. So, as Yasmin mentioned in my presentation, currently I'm Executive Director at Derechos Digitales. Derechos Digitales is a Latin American regional organization focused on the intersection of human rights and technology. And I will share a bit more of the work we have been doing that intersects this particular discussion that we're having today. The presentation I'll give derives from observations from my work at Derechos Digitales, some previous research, and largely it builds on the reflections of several academics and activists, mostly from Latin America. I'll try to bring some clues that can hopefully support us in building our political action when it comes to resisting colonial and private capture of public goods and to build alternative forms of developing and relating to technology. My goal is not to oppose digital transformation itself, it's also important to mention that, but to highlight the problems with how it has been driven and implemented in global south countries. So let's start. Digital transformation is a broad concept that is mobilized to represent different processes. Precisely because of that, when it comes to it being incorporated as a vocabulary into policy discussions, it generates confusion to several of us. So going back to some elements of to start this conversation, we can associate it with digitization processes, the act of transforming analog information and processes into digital, datafication processes, which has to do with the extraction of quantifiable data from information, actions, and processes. We know this goes beyond sociodemographic data. It also has to do with metadata and precisely transforming into data actions that were not quantifiable initially. It also involves elements of platformization, which has to do with the penetration of the infrastructures, economic processes, and governmental frameworks of platforms in different economic sectors and spheres of life. This is a definition by Paul Nyborg and Van Dyck from 2019. And it also has elements of automation with the incorporation of automated decision systems into public functions more recently, which has been the focus of the research I'm showing to you. And you can find the website right below my screen. That analyzes how AI has been included or introduced into public sector in Latin America. Although today we might be speaking more about automation and the use of AI in the public sector precisely, it is important to know that this has not, this doesn't mean that basic digitization processes have been concluded in the public sector within Latin America. The COVID-19 pandemic has evidenced how unequal those processes are and the implementations or the implications of lacking critical data for public policies, the type of implication that generates. We have researched together with the AUSUR consortium in Latin America how COVID apps and different policies for COVID were implemented and have understood how countries had to rely on data from private corporations to develop public policy. And let's recall, and this is something that we highlight on that study, that those data are marked by structural patterns of exclusion. We can think of mobile data from telecommunication operators, for instance, that embeds factors of exclusion, of digital exclusions, right? Which are predominant and really present in the Latin American region still. So besides the element of inequality, digital transformation depends widely on public-private partnerships with big tech monopolies or other intermediaries, thus facilitating surveillance and control of people and populations with direct impacts into their rights, dignity, and autonomy, and the transfer of data, knowledge, and power from our territories and communities to global tech monopolies in a form of digital colonialism. Both these aspects have been widely explored by different authors, so I won't focus on them today. The colonial factor of data extraction from our territories and our communities, and the surveillance and control elements. Let me just, before going into this point, I'll go back to this slide, although just illustrating some of this conversation, to share a bit of insight into digital transformation in Latin America. As I said, in Derechos Digitales, we have been developing research since 2019 about how states implement AI into the public sector. And what I'm going to share derives from this research. In this website, you can find 10 case studies of AI deployment in the public sector and 2 comparative analyses that we've done in different moments, analyzing how these processes were operating. So one thing I like to point out is that even in the absence of proper regulation, institutions and procedures to guarantee, for instance, rights to access to information, data protection, and privacy, Latin American countries haven't hesitated to incorporate private technology within public administration. They do so usually under a rhetoric of state efficiency and of promoting social good. And several of the initiatives we have seen emerge target particularly vulnerable groups, exposing them to interventions that first they are not able to consent with because sometimes they are not even known by these groups, and two, without enough safeguards and protections against abuse. One of the cases we analyzed was a public policy, a welfare policy deployed in Brazil during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was like a emergency assistant process, and people that were applying for that particular assistance didn't know that there was going to be automated processing of their data to assess eligibility to that particular support, and they didn't have information on how to question erroneous decisions about their eligibility. So this is one example on how they are both not able to consent because they don't know that their data is being processed behind the scenes when they apply for that policy, and you don't have enough safeguards or protections in case of abuse. In the case of AI deployment in the public sector, our research evidences a complete lack of transparency. Again, this is an illustrative case, and accountability within decision making related to its adoption. In several cases, the deployment derives from direct relationships between state actors and companies, either big tech or local intermediaries, and no procurement process is followed. We see pilot interventions as the norm with no justification on their continuity or interruption, and allowing increased dependency and extraction of data. Human rights considerations regarding the legality, necessity, and proportionality of these interventions are not usually taken into account. And the result is that affected people have no autonomy regarding their participation on these often pilot initiatives, or the possibility to appeal to decisions that are made based on information that they don't control. And again, we're talking about essential policies that target essential services and fundamental rights to fundamental economic and social rights from people. So the decisions that are being made actually have an implication on how they are able to exercise their rights, and they have no information about how to appeal. Going now to some clues that I would like to share with you, and this is something I would really be interested in hearing your thoughts about. The first point I would like to share is about how words always matter. While we as activists refer to digital inclusion as meaningful access to technology, digital autonomy, and digital sovereignty to express a vision of technology that is grounded in justice and that allows communities to exercise their rights, both collective and individual rights, the concept of digital transformation mixes a notion of tech neutrality with tech optimism that is represented by the idea that the digital transforms. And yes, from a socio-technical perspective, we know that this is true, but these visions are built from a deterministic approach that automatically associates the incorporation of technology with increased efficiency or well-being, regardless of the complex social interactions it implies and will continue to imply when technology is implemented. So in that sense, one eliminates the political economy elements of technology production, ignoring production chains and understanding technology as neutral technical artifacts. And two, it reinforces a colonial idea that more tech equals more economic development, and more economic development represents the end goals for everyone, everywhere. An interesting example comes from the educational field, which is my field of research, my personal research. Since the early 2000s, entities like the World Bank are promising that technology will itself not transform, but revolutionize educations, as if computers were a sort of panacea that can magically reshape relationships, change pedagogical practices, transform institutions, and with that, solve all problems one can relate to educational systems. Problems that, of course, are not necessarily being defined by the communities involved. One of the arguments defended by the World Bank in a report from 2003 was that access to internet in schools would change hierarchical relationships between students and teachers and allow students not to depend on, and this is literal, incompetent teachers. They could now, students, download courses from the MIT and learn by themselves. Several questions emerge from this reasoning. For instance, who determines if a teacher is competent or not? Who determines if MIT content is better or better suited than the curricular content offered by a teacher in a given grade or a given community? These are questions that are not answered, and we can think of a lot of questions that derive from this particular statement that we read there. These declarations, as I said, they are not new. This is one from 2003, and they illustrate the colonial nature of this type of project, beyond the idea of data extractions. Local knowledge is ignored as knowledge, and the holders of such knowledge, in this case teachers, are deemed incompetent and subject to replacement by machines. So this was a first clue for us to think about. A second one is about the power of design. As Paul, Nieborg, and Van Dijk again put, as platforms tend to employ different governing instruments, interfaces, algorithms, policies, without much regard for particular political cultural traditions that are often clashes with local rules, norms, and regulatory frameworks. Such processes are often invisible to the digital transformation conversation and agenda in favor of this idea of neutrality that I mentioned before. While technology is presented as mere digital infrastructure, they include interfaces that hide hierarchies and rules for interaction that affect policy design and implementation and that are not available for public scrutiny. Let's recall that several of these infrastructures are offered as a product. Again, going back to the educational context from which I come from, in my research, you have these huge programs of embedding educational clouds or educational platforms into educational systems that are not necessarily customized or adapted to local realities. These are just a product that will be incorporated into the educational system. And they embed into design a pedagogical approach that can be or not aligned with the one adopted by a state, by a community, or by a particular institution. So this transformation that we're talking about within the digital transformation agenda has, regardless of the attempt to make it neutral, a particular view of the word embedded, a particular view of the specific field embedded that are oftentimes external from the context of implementation. We can also think of predictive policing as something that has a very particular view of the world and view of security that is embedded in this technology. We can think of facial and emotional recognition technologies that are built under very questionable assumptions about how someone's face relates to someone's behavior, etc., etc. I guess these are some clear examples on how this operates. And then there's also this third clue I like to share with you, which has to do with going beyond technology. The example from the educational field, it also evidences a form of policymaking that transfer problem detection and response to external, hypothetically technical agents who are seen as knowledge holders. In that particular case, we are talking about World Bank employees defining a problem, defining how to solve it, and defining how policy should be made. It attempts to eliminate politics from policy, transforming rights-based language into much less accessible technical vocabulary. We have seen this technocratic approach in different areas and processes during the last century, but when it comes to the incorporation of digital infrastructure and platforms within the public sector, these dynamics are exacerbated. Decision power is transferred directly and indirectly to the same tech bros behind them. Indirectly, because intermediaries continue to play a role validating and supporting and financing these interventions. But as Professor Lina Taylor from Tilburg University and her research group put it, infrastructural dominance brings with it forms of ideological dominance and gives commercial technology firms power to define what is good, what is relevant, what is effective in almost every area of life. This process is called by them sector transgressions, when firms use their computing power to step outside their realm of competence. So what you're seeing goes a bit beyond the initial technocratic approach that we have seen in the past century. It goes into how, because of design and because of their compute power, companies or tech companies are directly involved as valid actors to define policy discussion related or not to technology, and how institutions and policy considerations are expected to respond to their assumptions and proposals. At the same time, we see affected communities systematically excluded from participation in decision making. It's important to note that this transfer of decision power directly to tech companies undermines democratic oversight, reduces accountability, and the possibility to redress rights violations. Again, when this power is exercises, for instance, through design, it's more and more difficult, and you have more and more public and private actors involved in decision so that communities can resist. More than mere transfer of data, we are talking about a full transfer of policymaking power to private actors. So coming to the end of this initial presentation and provocation I wanted to share with you, I'd like to bring some reflections on the fact that to be taken serious, a digital transformation agenda cannot continue to be used as an excuse for the exploitation of people through data extraction, and to conclude the technocratic dream of excluding politics and people from decision making. On the contrary, it needs to begin by allowing communities to shape its priorities and define its limits. That's why Derechos Digital is a key part of our activism, and our research today is centered on transparency and meaningful participation in decision making. And from such grounds, any digital transformation agenda cannot be disconnected from investments on basic connectivity infrastructures and policy that foster local tech development, local data governance policies, etc. We know communities are building a lot around this. It would be great to hear from Madeleine about her experience, but it's important to notice that this cannot be deployed or developed in the void. It's important that state is able also to facilitate the development of such infrastructures and building the governance infrastructures that allow them to flourish and to be significant. There are different strategies on how communities can claim back technology for their well-being and shift generic discourses into local action. And I'm sure people might ask me, in such complex contexts like 2026, what do we see as a direction? What I can share with you from now is that from Derechos Digitales, we are part of a feminist AI research network in Latin America that launched the call for initiatives for just some weeks, and we received 129 proposals of tech interventions that are grounded in principles of feminism, in principles of justice, that are really grounded into communities and really connected into communities. So I guess that can bring us hope in the fact that communities are imagining and are building and are acting towards digital transformation that actually responds to their needs and to the exercise of their rights today. So we're not talking about future forcing or anything like that. This is happening today. I'll pause here and we can go to the Q&A. Yasmin, thank you for this space, and happy to continue interacting with the public.
Thank you so much, Amila. We've received already some questions here at the Q&A feature, but I would like to know a bit more, if possible, about this project that you led. with the feminist interventions, possibilities regarding AI use. And if you have like an experience or idea of projects that are publicly led with like public interest in mind of use of the AI deployment in the public sector, if you could share a bit more about that, it would be great. Thank you so much. And then we follow for more questions. Thank you.
Of course, Yasmin. Thank you for the question. So, actually, Derechos Digitales is not leading this work. We are part of a very broad network that also builds from a series of initiatives that were deployed in past years. This is the Feminist AI Research Network in Latin America. And yes, we have been seeing the emergence of different initiatives that dispute these narratives and this totalizing narrative or totalizing idea of digital transformation that I was just trying to describe. We have activists trying to shape how data is presented. The data about femicides is presented to the public together with judicial systems. So we have feminist activists trying to connect with judicial systems and develop tech that allows this information to be accessible for the public and be able to generate conversation and transformation and give transparency to the types of decisions that are being taken in this area, for instance, which we know is something critical in our context. We have experiences of building chatbots to better inform and better assist women that are being affected by harassment or any form of violence in the urban space. We have initiatives that are trying to offer communities better knowledge about how to manage their natural resources. That's also happening today. And I guess the interesting element of all that is that each of these initiatives and each of these interventions allows knowledge to be built from practice, right? So we also have like learnings from these feminist practices of tech development that allows us to think how we can actually continue to fight for and continue to develop other forms of building tech. Because as I was saying, it's not only about how it is implemented, it's also about how it is developed, how it is designed, which are the principles and who participates in this design. Derechos Digitales, we are also following a lot of the discussions about AI regulation in Latin America. And one of the things that we believe are crucial is that you have participation processes from design to deployment to evaluation, etc. And that such participation actually responds to the diversity of people that can be actually affected by these communities. We have been seeing that we have like online consultations with very limited period of time for participation, and this does not reflect an actual possibility of listening to people that are affected. Other things that we are continuing to elaborate and formulate and ask authorities to actually implement is that, for instance, indigenous groups have the right to previous consultation when it comes to interventions that affects their knowledge, their resources, their data also, right? So trying to shift a bit the type of power relations that we have right now when it comes to tech deployment, tech development, and etc. So from this exercise, we have published two materials I can share afterwards in the chat with participants about learnings from feminist AI development in Latin America. And there's a lot of things about how communities are actually able to influence decision making, how they are actually able to define the problems and how the problems are going to be responded. Because the definition of problems, and that was a bit the exercise I tried to make with this relationship with the technocratic ecosystem, is crucial right now. So there are some actors that are defining the problems and are defining the priorities that are not necessarily listening to communities in terms of what are their priorities. And when we talk to people, several ideas emerge on what AI should be doing. for instance, right? Several very important ideas on what AI should be doing, on what we should be prioritizing when it comes to tech development that are related to their real problems and not necessarily to some um, projections on what these problems would be and these priorities would be. So it's not only about defining the response, but also about defining the problem together.
Thank you so much, Amila. I was really interested in understanding a bit more also about what you were saying, like trying to expand the concept of the right of consultation for indigenous groups from the ILO convention on these topics, also to encompass also data. It's really a wonderful idea. I really wanted to know more about that. But following forward to the questions from the audience, I would like to pose the question for Ioana Gallo, from Ioana Gallo, sorry. Do you think it is possible to use AI, a technology that is imposed by a few actors with a lot of power in the public sector without reinforcing colonial perspectives? In your experience, what do you propose to deal with this continuous dilemma? Let me put it live. Thank you so much, Amila.
Yes, this is a very interesting question, and we have been debating that also when we think about feminist AI, right? Because this whole concept of AI appears to come back to this idea, to some ideas of power and of power concentration, and some ideas of power dynamics that are basically embedded into this concept of like on the types of techniques that are used, on the types on the scale on which it's produced. So it's definitely a dilemma. I guess we have been playing with that within several activist groups that I participate to actually think through which other forms of AI or which other forms of technology can we build. And I really invite you to take a look into the projects and the initiatives I'm mentioning from the Feminist AI Research Network. I would definitely share that on the chat afterwards, because it indicates that communities can be very much creative when it comes to building tech that responds to their own needs. When it comes to the implementation within the state, I guess the claim and the call is for technology that is meaningful, technology that actually responds to public policy needs and not necessarily operate as a proxy for economic development or for this colonial narrative that makes an equal sign between technology development and other types of colonial values. And I guess that's the question that should be posed into communities in terms of how, to which extent AI is necessary for this. And this is a bit the framework that we are working with, and it's grounded on human rights obligations of legality, necessity, proportionality, and the claim is about how do you make sure that tech use is necessary and proportional to the problems that they are defining. I brought the example from the pandemic because I guess it was a very extreme moment in which we could see the need for digital information, digital data, and connectivity among policymaking in a very concrete way, at least in Latin American countries. And we could really see how states were failing that mandate, despite the fact that they were claiming to be implementing very advanced technologies for purposes that we don't understand. And this is also a problem of how do you define these processes, right? So you had countries with very little digital penetration claiming to be adopting digital contact tracing techniques that were offered by big tech platforms within that moment, in the same time that you had in the same country people that were having to share information about contagious with pictures of paper through to WhatsApp platforms. And that's problematic from different levels. And I guess it shows a bit what's the type of decisions that are being that policymakers are having to make in very precarious contexts. So it's more about how do we make sure that technology can serve the actual needs that they have, and not so much about if tech or how much tech is or not necessary. I guess one basic principle that we adopt in the Riccios Italis is about digital transformation shouldn't deviate funds and investments from basic social policies that are being implemented, for instance, educational policy, health policies, etc. And that's also something that we have been trying to propose and to defend together with other human rights experts internationally. But it's an issue that is pretty much invisibilized within global digital governance conversations. So we have been trying very hard to put this on the forefront of conversations, because we know people's lives are being pretty much affected by these types of decisions today. Yes, I guess I changed a bit the way of the answer, because I feel like I talked a bit about the feminist AI before, but happy to share these references with you to inspire on how this has been occurring today.
Thank you so much, Amila. And we'll definitely include them also in the report that we are launching after this series ends. So we have two more questions from the audience. One of them is from Hannah Frulukai. I don't know if I'm saying the last name right. Sorry. My apologies. So hi, Jamila. Thanks for a great talk. Given the sector transgressions from big tech are difficult to govern or regulate, what are some community-oriented methods of resistance? It feels like AI is being shoved down everyone's throats. What can we do? So I think it's a great question that also talks a lot with what you were saying before. So thank you so much, Jamila.
Yes, thank you for this question too. I guess, yes, we are discussing big power shifts and huge movements at the geopolitical level, at the national level, at the community level. There are different indications on forms of dissent. I guess we have seen, for instance, how communities are refusing to adopt certain technology or are claiming their own right to define when or not to use this technology. That's why we believe that looking deeply into what happens into the public sector is important, and being able to actually listen or consult people before tech is deployed and mandated into certain communities is key, because that's when the right of not offering data into certain technology could be exercised more meaningfully. But we know that certain communities are already exercising their right of not being connected, and are claiming their exercise of not being connected. And even if when we think of digital inclusion and meaningful access to technology, we have to think of meaningful access within a particular context and within and with participation of communities, also defining how such connectivity will be implemented. I'm shifting a bit away from the topic of conversation today, but we know that when it comes to connectivity infrastructure, we now have these huge projects on satellite connectivity, particularly relevant in rural and remote areas in Latin America. But some communities are already understanding that you have I'm sorry, I just got distracted by the chat one. But we know some communities are already aware of the implications of engaging in such infrastructure that is highly concentrated into one provider, etc. These are like the one of the things that are being discussed here, and I think is relevant for this conversation around dissent, right? You also have several initiatives about tech deployment at the local level, and I guess this is key to dispute this idea of I'm sorry, I'm missing words. Large-scale projects, large-scale uniformized, universal projects that are being promoted within these narratives of digital transformation. So instead of adopting certain already defined platforms, already developed platform, communities also trying to operate in a small scale. That happens with AI, thinking of small language models and experiment with other forms of technology, but that happens also when it comes to connectivity, community connectivity, that not necessarily has to be interconnected with the broader internet. It can also prioritize local communication and information that is relevant for that particular group and not necessarily for others. Pretty much contextualized format. And I think these initiatives, they dispute this idea that tech is only big tech, which I think is key for us in this conversation right now, and that in disputing it at the local level with within communities and smaller projects is also important to show to states that you might have other forms of developing and deploying technology. And when it comes to states, I guess there are different actions that are not being so much activated in this moment. For instance, as I said, usually these systems are incorporated without public procurement processes, and public procurement could be a key tool to negotiate with big tech about how technology should be like, or which type of elements or which type of safeguards should be embedded in this technology, and trying to shift a bit the conversation. We know there are several powers, and this is a very difficult conversation. We know the European Union is having a hard time making big tech comply with their own regulation, but it's just a tool that might not be so much explored in certain contexts. And it might be that in certain contexts, you could have an opportunity to shift certain forms of tech delivery, or even considering how within those agreements you could make sure that part of the knowledge that is being produced keeps inside countries and communities, etc. So I guess these are some initial thoughts about it. We have several examples in Latin America about tech resistance and tech dissent that comes from refusing tech to developing alternatives and supporting alternatives. And I guess apparently, although they are not necessarily always visible, they are pretty much continuing and flourishing and resisting this idea of large scale tech as the mainstream.
Thank you so much, Amila, for the answer. We have time, I think, for one more question. We don't want to overburden you also with tons of questions. So it is from Michelle Hellman. She thanks you for the presentation, and also asks that she says that she's curious what examples of success you might have that demonstrate effectively shifting from transformation towards sovereignty or similar. We could talk a bit about that, like especially when talking about the indigenous communities and local technology that can actually dispute this idea. Because I think the concept of digital sovereignty that we have been working on, that the governments in several countries have been presenting to us, has still the infrastructure, uses still the infrastructure of big tech. We cannot deploy digital sovereignty using cloud servers from Amazon, Microsoft, and etc. Cannot just like develop mechanisms of control and oversight of these technologies. We have to develop, I think, also independent technologies. But I would like to add to Michelle's question, I think, can we actually do that? Can we escape this big tech's paradigm of, can we actually develop better technology, especially in countries that are middle income, like Brazil and etc., other countries in Latin America? Do you have any ideas of that? it is a matter of industrial policies only, or it is actually a problem of lacking of budget? How do you see this issue?
Thank you so much for the question, and Yasmin for the compliment to the question. I, I guess these are complex issues that they necessarily put us back into how power distributes in at the geopolitical field. I guess Brazil is an interesting example because we have had industrial policy that tried to favor tech development for a long time ago, for decades ago, and we also had US trade policies trying to prevent that from happening and trying to punish Brazil for developing or for prioritizing developing its technology. And I guess today we are again facing this type of dynamic. So nothing is just because things have a cause and there are very complex relationships to this. Regardless of that, I believe to be able to think of digital sovereignty in a meaningful way, we might need to rethink what we consider tech development. And that's why the conversation about scale is key. I mean, the model that we have today basically tries to impose certain technology as more efficient, as more economic, as more practical. So from one day to the other, you have all these machines in the cloud operating for you. It doesn't matter which type of natural resource they are using or which communities they are affecting for that. It doesn't matter who are the people that are being exploited to make that technology operate, and that's how they erase the full chain, and they put you this product and say, well, this is what you need and this is efficient and you won't need to put any money on that to be better. If we don't challenge this assumption that these systems are more efficient, we are not able to think out of this prison that we are captured in. So when we think of other forms of tech development, we need to think of them as being clues, again, for us to think of different types of tech development. We might not have enough compute to build like a national level system that will operate for anyone and in any context and whatever you want to put on that. But we might be able to have a very specific system that serves universities' needs, national universities' needs in a particular context. We used to have policies in Brazil, for instance, that would protect and prevent public institutions from adopting certain big tech. And while that was in place, you had alternative systems that served such needs. The problem is that the definition of the needs and the definition of the problems are not necessarily only in the hands of the community. So you include certain ideas of what's useful, what is needed for that same university community, and suddenly these systems that used to serve their needs, it's not serving their needs anymore, and suddenly there's going to be a market, a commercial actor that will come and say, you know what, I have the answer for these problems, because they are operating in the full decision chain. That's why the sector transgressions conversation is interesting and is important for us as a clue, because we have to understand that the definition of problems and the definition of priorities needs to go back to communities. Otherwise, we're going to continue capture. Oh, but we have these systems. Oh, but they have this one with this another feature that this one does not have. And they are constantly including features in their systems that we don't know exactly how will they serve the public interest, how do they respond to the priorities that are defined at the national level, but they are there, and suddenly the fact that there is another solution that doesn't have that, and now that is AI, precisely in generative AI. So if you see some of these platforms are now at the stage of embedding generative AI as a standard feature within that platform, and suddenly this makes the possibility of thinking of alternatives very much difficult, because those to building generative AI is not something that is so easily accessible to all. So to go back, I guess if we want to think of digital sovereignty, we need to rethink what we are prioritizing as use of tech in the public sector in a way that is sustainable. And at the same time, we need also to think, how do we input safeguards into how big tech is incorporated into the public sector? We shouldn't forget that, because that's crucial, not only from compensation point of view, in a sense of you will have access to this data, we need to have access to this data, but also because of the control and surveillance mechanism that they imply, and that we should have always present, because this also has implications on the possibility for dissent, on the possibility for autonomy more generally, and dignity more generally, and rights more generally. So these two things, I guess, should be the top of our minds when we think of sovereignty. And unfortunately, unless what we have been seeing as digital sovereignty in our region has not been, as you said, Yasmin, so autonomous or so much able to include these compensation elements, and try to rebalance power relations in this particular aspect.
Thank you so much, Amila. I had like 4 questions here, both from Jess and I, that we're not posing today for you, because we don't want to overburden you with questions. So we already like extended the time a bit for today, as we only had Jamila as a speaker. Candela Salazar asked some recommendations on readings for about the relation between global north and global south and AI. Jamila, you could send it to us, or here in the chat if you have any right now in mind. But we are also, Candela, including them in the report after we end the series. We're publishing this report, basically compiling all the subjects and quotes of the speakers and etc., and references for anyone interested in each topic that we covered here during the series. So don't worry about that. Like, the references are going to be included also in this report. So thank you so much, Amila, once again. It was brilliant. It's always incredible listening to you. I learn a lot with you and your work. Thank you so much. You're such an inspiration for young scholars here in Brazil as well. So thank you so much for everything, for all your contributions and the work that Derechos Digitales does, like with activism and advocacy and research as well. Thank you so much for everything. So I don't know if you want to say any concluding remarks, Amila, but thank you so much once again. And for anyone that is keeping up, is still here with us today, we will continue the Gender in Tech Talk series on March 24, 2026, with a session on immigration and techno-authoritarianism. Please subscribe to the DTG Lab newsletter that Amy put it here in the chat earlier, and stay updated. Stay tuned to our YouTube channel to access the recordings as well. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Jamila. Take care. See you.
Thank you, Yasmin. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.